God cast them out before the flood ever came. Enoch saw what they became beyond the gates of Eden, and what he wrote down was never meant to be read by human eyes. There was a boundary drawn around Eden long before the flood ever touched the earth, and almost no one asks what that boundary was actually protecting. We are taught the story of the garden as though it ends with a sword of flame and a closed gate, a tidy conclusion to a tidy tragedy. But Genesis never tells us the boundary stayed closed. It tells us who tried to cross it again. Genesis 6 opens with a sentence so strange that most translations soften it into something forgettable. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Read that again, slowly, not admired, not courted. Took. Something crossed a line that was never meant to be crossed, and Scripture records the consequence in a single devastating verse. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. For centuries, the Church has tried to explain this verse away, insisting the sons of God were merely the righteous line of Seth, and the daughters of men simply the wayward line of Cain. It is a comfortable reading. It is also, according to the oldest Jewish and Christian commentary we possess, almost certainly wrong. The Book of Enoch, quoted directly in the Epistle of Jude, names these beings plainly watchers. 200 of them, led by a chief named Semjaza, descended upon Mount Hermon and bound themselves by oath to take wives from among the daughters of men and to teach them things heaven never intended for human hands to hold. Jude does not treat this as folklore. He writes of angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own habitation, reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. That is not poetic language. That is a prison sentence, handed down for a crime the institutional church rarely names from the pulpit. What did the watchers actually teach? This is where Enoch's testimony becomes almost unbearable to read. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and the art of war itself, along with the working of metals and the vanity of ornament that led women towards seduction rather than sanctity. Shemihaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabel taught the mysteries of the stars. Heaven's knowledge meant to be revealed on heaven's timetable was stolen and handed to a world not yet ready to carry it, and the earth was filled with violence because of it. The offspring of these unions were not merely tall men or ancient warlords, as some modern commentators try to insist. Enoch calls them giants, 3,000 ells in height, consuming the labor of men until nothing remained, then turning against mankind itself to devour flesh and drink blood. When the earth could no longer feed them, they turned on one another, and their spirits, Enoch tells us, did not simply vanish at death. They remained, wandering, tormenting, becoming what later ages would come to call demons. There is a reason the Watchers chose Mount Hermon for their descent, and it is not a detail Scripture leaves to chance. Hermon sits on the border of ancient Bashan, a region later Scripture associates with giants and with Og, the last of the Rephaim, whose iron bed alone measured over 13 feet. Deuteronomy remembers this land with a kind of unease that lingers across centuries, as though the writers themselves understood Bashan carried a memory too dark to fully explain. Enoch tells us the 200 watchers swore a mutual oath on that mountain's summit, binding themselves together with curses so that none among them could break rank and return to heaven alone. The name Hermon itself, in the oldest tradition, was understood to come from a word meaning cursed, because it was there the curse of their rebellion was first spoken aloud. This is not scattered folklore invented centuries later. The Genesis Apocryphon, recovered from the caves at Qumran, preserves an account of Lamech's own suspicion that his son Noah was not fully human. So widespread had the corruption already become by his generation, and Lamech goes to his father Methuselah in desperation, who in turn seeks answers from Enoch himself. The fear in that exchange is not symbolic. It is a father wondering whether the blood in his own house had already been touched by what descended on Hermon. This is why God locked the gate at Eden in the first place, not merely to keep man from the tree of life in a moment of shame, but to draw a permanent boundary between the heavenly order and the earthly one, a boundary that the Watchers would later shatter with catastrophic consequence. The flood was not simply a judgment against human wickedness in the abstract. It was, according to the Book of Jubilees and the Genesis Apocryphon found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, a direct response to the corruption of the bloodline itself, an attempt to erase a hybrid contamination that threatened the very seed line through which the Messiah would one day come. Consider that for a moment. The flood was not only about water, it was about preserving a genealogy that Satan himself, through the Watchers, had tried to destroy before it could ever reach Bethlehem. Enoch was taken up to witness all of this directly. Genesis tells us simply that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. But the book that bears his name tells us where he was taken and what he was shown, the storehouses of the stars, the chambers where the souls of the dead await judgment, the place prepared for the Watcher's final punishment, and it commissions him with a task almost too heavy to carry. Go and tell the Watchers there is no peace for them. That message, delivered from a mortal man to fallen angels chained beneath the earth, is one of the most extraordinary scenes in the entire body of apocryphal scripture, and it is a scene the modern church has almost entirely forgotten how to tell. If this account of Enoch's ascent and the judgment of the Watchers has stirred something in you, something closer to recognition than surprise, that instinct is worth trusting. We have put together everything Enoch witnessed, every gate he was shown, every Watcher he was sent to condemn, inside a single illustrated guide called The Forbidden Book of Enoch. It walks you through the Watchers, the origin of the Nephilim, and the world that existed before the flood in a way Sunday sermons never will. Fully illustrated, so the visions Enoch described become something you can actually see, rather than only imagine. The link is waiting in the very first comment beneath this video, and if these hidden scriptures matter to you the way they matter to us, subscribing costs nothing, but keeps this kind of testimony from disappearing back into obscurity. There is far more of Enoch's account still ahead of us. To understand why the giants grew as monstrous as Enoch describes them, you have to understand what the Watchers actually were before their fall. They were not distant angels observing humanity from a cloud. The word itself, Watchers, comes from the Aramaic iron, meaning those who watch, and in Daniel's own vision centuries later, a Watcher descends from heaven still holy, still obedient, crying aloud that a decree has been issued by the Watchers and the demand by the word of the Holy Ones. Daniel uses the same title for faithful angelic beings that Enoch uses for the fallen ones, which tells us something important. Watcher was not a description of rebellion. It was a rank, an office, a class of angelic being positioned close enough to the throne of God to observe the affairs of heaven directly. What fell at Hermon was not some lesser order of spirit easily dismissed as mythology. It was 200 beings who had stood quite literally in the immediate presence of glory and chose to abandon that position for flesh. This is what makes their punishment so severe, and it is also what makes their offspring so unnatural. When Scripture speaks elsewhere of angels, it insists they neither marry nor are given in marriage, that their nature is fundamentally other than ours. For a being of that order to bind itself physically to a human woman was not a moral failing on the scale of ordinary sin. It was a violation of the created order itself, an intermingling never intended to exist. And the result was not merely large men. Enoch describes the Nephilim's growth as unnatural from the start, devouring the produce of human labor until the earth itself could no longer sustain them. And Numbers preserves the memory of this bloodline long after the flood, when the spies sent into Canaan returned trembling, reporting that they saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, and describing themselves as grasshoppers in their own sight beside them. Whatever the flood was meant to erase, some trace of it apparently survived long enough to still be walking the hill country of Hebron 1,000 years later. The Book of Giants, recovered in fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls, gives us something the canonical text never does, the voice of the giants themselves in their final days. They dream. Two of them, named Ohia and Hahia, wake from visions of a tablet being washed and destroyed, of a garden of trees uprooted, of judgment descending on everything they have built. They send for Enoch, the same man taken bodily into heaven, to interpret what they have seen, and Enoch's answer is without mercy. The dream means destruction. Their father's works will be blotted out. This detail matters more than it first appears, because it means the giants themselves understood their end was coming, and understood exactly who bore responsibility for it, the watchers who fathered them and the heaven those watchers had betrayed. Even the monsters of that age, in other words, could read the same judgment we can read now in Enoch's testimony, and even they could not escape it. There is also the matter of Azazel's fate specifically, singled out among the 200 in a way none of the others are. Enoch records that the whole earth was corrupted through the works taught by Azazel, and heaven's judgment against him is described with unusual physicality. Bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into darkness, make an opening in the desert, and cover him with rough and jagged rocks. This is the same Azazel whose name reappears deliberately in Leviticus, in the ritual of the scapegoat sent out into the wilderness on the Day of Atonement, carrying the sins of Israel to a desolate place bearing his name. Scholars have debated for centuries whether this connection is coincidence or design, but the pattern is difficult to dismiss once you have read Enoch's account in full. A being condemned to the wilderness for corrupting the earth becomes, generations later, the namesake of a ritual in which Israel's sin is symbolically exiled to that same wilderness. Whether or not every detail can be proven, the resonance is too precise to be accidental, and it suggests the priesthood of ancient Israel understood far more about the Watchers than later tradition would ever admit publicly. What should trouble us most is not simply that this happened once. It is Christ's own warning that it will in some form happen again. As the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be, he tells his disciples in Matthew's Gospel, and he does not soften the comparison. He does not say the days of Noah were merely wicked in some generic sense. He draws a direct line between that specific age, the age Enoch describes in such disturbing detail, and the age that will precede his own return. If the days of Noah involved a supernatural corruption severe enough to warrant erasing nearly the entire human population from the earth, then Christ's warning is not a comment about complacency or eating and drinking without concern. It is a warning that the same category of spiritual assault, the same crossing of a forbidden boundary, will characterize the final age before judgment falls again. Ephesians tells us plainly that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Paul is not speaking in metaphor. He is naming the same order of being Enoch names, still active, still organized, still operating according to a hierarchy that predates the flood. This is precisely why the account of the Watchers was never meant to remain buried in obscure scrolls, read only by scholars. It reframes the entire biblical narrative, from Eden's locked gate to Bashan's giant-haunted hill country, to Christ's own warning about the last days, as one continuous story of a boundary drawn, broken, and drawn again. The Nephilim were not an isolated horror confined to a single chapter of Genesis. They were a symptom of something ongoing, something Enoch was shown the full shape of, and something the modern church has largely stopped teaching from the pulpit altogether. The deeper this account runs, the clearer it becomes why heaven guarded this knowledge so carefully, and why the earth was never meant to hold it without consequence. A boundary broken once by beings who knew exactly what they were doing is not a boundary that heals itself, simply because centuries pass in silence. Enoch's ascent did not stop at witnessing judgment. He was carried further, shown the actual architecture of creation, the gates through which the sun and moon and stars pass in their appointed courses, and here his testimony becomes something closer to a cosmic survey than a vision. He names 12 gates for the sun alone, 6 in the east and 6 in the west, each opening at its proper season, each governed by an order so precise that Enoch describes the angel Uriel measuring the winds themselves, weighing them, numbering the stars as though creation were a temple with a floor plan, and heaven's own architect had left the blueprints behind for one man to copy down. This is not decoration added to make the text feel mystical. It is the same God who tells Job he alone determined the measurements of the earth, who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together, revealing to Enoch a version of that same cornerstone from the inside. What makes this section of Enoch's account so unsettling is what he finds at the edges of that architecture, places where the order breaks down. He is shown a deep abyss with pillars of heavenly fire, a prison already prepared, and he asks his angelic guide, what he is looking at. The answer given to him is direct. This place is the prison of the angels, and here they will be kept forever. Enoch is not merely told a story about the watchers in the abstract. He is walked to the actual location of their confinement while it stands empty, waiting. A holding cell built before the crime that would fill it, which raises a question the church rarely allows itself to ask aloud. If God prepared that prison in advance, he did not merely react to the Watchers' rebellion. He already knew it was coming, and Enoch was shown the room reserved for it long before the door was ever needed. There is a further detail in Enoch's cosmic tour that deserves attention on its own. The 7 stars he is shown bound together, burning, cast out from the ordered ranks of heaven for transgressing the commandment of the Lord before their time came. His angelic guide tells him these are stars that did not appear in their season, and for this they are bound in this place until 10,000 years, the time of their guilt, be fulfilled. This detail matters because it establishes something the modern reader easily misses, that rebellion among heavenly beings was not confined to the 200 watchers alone. Enoch's cosmology describes an entire order of celestial beings, some obedient, some cast down, layered across the architecture of creation itself, and the Watcher's descent to Hermon was simply the most consequential and best documented instance of a much older pattern of defection. This context reframes Ephesians' language of principalities and powers, rulers of darkness and spiritual wickedness in high places, as something Enoch had already mapped out centuries earlier, a hierarchy of fallen authority operating in layers most modern believers have never been taught even exists. It is against this backdrop that certain places on Earth begin to look less like coincidence and more like scar tissue. Göbekli Tepe, in what is now southeastern Turkey, has forced archaeology to quietly rewrite its own timeline. Its megalithic pillars, carved with images of serpents, scorpions, and creatures with no clear parallel elsewhere, predate agriculture itself, predate writing, predate everything conventional history insists must come before large-scale construction is possible. No one has adequately explained how a hunter-gatherer society, with no wheel, no metal tools, no written language, quarried and erected stones weighing many tons and arranged them with astronomical precision. The site sits almost directly within the region Enoch and Jubilees both associate with the Watcher's descent, a detail too geographically exact to wave away as pattern-seeking. If beings possessing knowledge beyond human capacity did in fact walk this earth in the earliest ages, a monument built with impossible precision by impossible means, in exactly the region their testimony was preserved as originating from, deserves more scrutiny than mainstream archaeology has ever been willing to give it. Baalbek carries its own version of the same unease. The trilithon, 3 stones each weighing roughly 800 tons, sits at the base of a temple platform in modern Lebanon, and no crane in existence today, ancient or modern, has ever successfully lifted and placed a stone of that mass with the precision found there. Local tradition, recorded by ancient historians long before archaeology existed as a discipline, associated the site with giants, calling it the dwelling place of a race that lived before the flood and whose labor these stones represented. Josephus himself, writing in the 1st century, records that the descendants of the fallen angels' offspring were men of gigantic stature, and that their works remained visible to his own generation. He is not writing folklore for entertainment. He is writing as a historian, recording what his contemporaries still believe to be verifiable fact: stones you could travel to and place your own hand against. Puma Punku, high in the Bolivian Altiplano, offers something stranger still. Stones cut with such mathematical precision, interlocking H-blocks with perfectly matched right angles and smooth interior curves, that modern engineers using diamond-tipped tools struggle to reproduce them without power machinery. The local Aymara oral tradition surrounding the site speaks of an age before the sun, a time of giants who built in darkness before humanity as we know it existed. Separated by an ocean, by an entirely different continent and cultural context, this tradition echoes the same core memory found in Genesis, in Jubilees, in Enoch, a race of outsized beings present at the dawn of the world, gone by the time ordinary humanity inherited the earth. 3 continents, 3 unrelated cultures, and the same fractured memory of giants who built what should not have been buildable. None of these sites standing alone would prove anything, but taken together, set against Enoch's own testimony of gates, prisons, and a cosmic order violated from within, they begin to form something harder to dismiss than isolated legend. The Watchers taught mankind metallurgy, architecture, and the working of stone according to Enoch's own list of forbidden knowledge. Precisely the categories of skill these ruins seem to demonstrate in ways still not fully explained. If Enoch's account is what it claims to be, a first-hand record of what heaven revealed to one man before the flood erased almost everything else, then the stones scattered across 3 continents are not mysteries waiting for a better engineering theory. They are witnesses, silent and enormous, to exactly the world Enoch described walking through, before the waters came and buried nearly all of it beneath judgment. There is a phrase buried inside Genesis 6:4 that most readers pass over without a second glance, and it may be the most unsettling 4 words in the entire chapter. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after that. Also after that. If the flood was meant to erase the corruption of the Watchers' bloodline entirely, why does Scripture itself admit the Nephilim persisted beyond it? Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, one of the oldest Aramaic paraphrases of the Torah, addresses this directly, naming the sons of God who fell in Noah's day, and stating plainly that when the sons of the great ones saw that the daughters of men were fair, they took wives from among them, and that their offspring continued to exist after the waters had receded. This is not a fringe reading invented to sensationalize the text. It is a translation tradition preserved by rabbinic scholars who saw no contradiction between believing in one flood and believing the corruption it was meant to cleanse had already found a way to survive it. Numbers 13 confirms the same unsettling continuity from the other side of the timeline. When the 12 spies return from scouting Canaan, their report singles out one detail above all others. We saw the Nephilim there, the sons of Enoch, which come of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. This is roughly 1,000 years after the flood, and the spies use the exact same word Genesis used to describe the pre-flood corruption, Nephilim, applied without hesitation to a living population still occupying the land God had promised to Israel. Deuteronomy adds another layer, recording that the land of the Rephaim, sometimes called Zamzumim by the Ammonites, was a people great and many and tall as the Anakim, and that the Lord destroyed them before Ammon, so that they might dwell in their place, as he did for the children of Esau against the Horim on Mount Seir. Whatever this bloodline was, it was not confined to one region or one tribe. It appears scattered across Canaan under different names given by different nations, a giant-class population widespread enough that multiple peoples record having to fight through it just to claim their inheritance. Og, king of Bashan, stands as the clearest surviving representative of this pre-flood corruption still walking the earth in Moses' own generation. Deuteronomy tells us he alone remained of the remnant of the Rephaim, and preserves a detail almost too specific to be invented for effect. His bed, made of iron, 9 cubits in length and 4 cubits in width, kept on public display in Rabbath of the children of Ammon, as though it were a monument. Proof for anyone who doubted the scale of what Israel had defeated. 9 cubits comes to roughly 13.5 feet. This is not poetic exaggeration meant to glorify a military victory. This is a specific, verifiable artifact that the biblical author expected his audience could go and inspect for themselves if they questioned the account. A level of confidence rarely offered for details meant purely as legend. The Sibylline Oracles, a body of prophetic material drawing on both Jewish and later Christian tradition, preserve yet another angle on this same memory, describing an age of violence and impiety among a race sprung from the union of the Watchers and mortal women, a generation whose arrogance grew so great that the earth itself groaned beneath the weight of their crimes before judgment finally fell. What makes this text valuable is not its canonical authority, which it does not claim, but its independent preservation of the same essential memory found across entirely separate traditions, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Hellenistic Jewish sources, all converging on a single narrative core. A race of hybrid beings whose existence provoked catastrophic divine response. When multiple largely independent literary traditions preserve the same unusual claim across centuries and cultures. That convergence deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as coincidence. There is also the question of why God allowed even this partial memory to survive Israel's own conquest narrative, rather than erasing it from the record entirely. If the Nephilim bloodline were merely an embarrassing footnote, an ancient people who happened to be unusually tall, there would be little theological reason to preserve their name so consistently across Numbers, Deuteronomy, and later historical books like Joshua and Samuel, where Goliath of Gath is himself described in terms that echo this same giant tradition, standing 6 cubits and a span, roughly 9.5 feet, armed with a spear whose iron head alone weighed 600 shekels. David's confrontation with Goliath, so often reduced to a simple lesson about courage against overwhelming odds, reads very differently once set against this longer bloodline. A shepherd boy anointed by God faces down, quite possibly, the last significant remnant of the exact corruption the flood was sent to erase, armed with nothing but a sling and the same divine confidence Enoch himself carried when commissioned to confront the Watchers directly. The pattern repeats because the conflict itself never fully ended at the flood. It simply changed its battlefield, moving from the antediluvian world into the conquest of Canaan, and finally into a single valley where a covenant king's ancestor stood alone against what remained of it. This is where Noah's own story becomes far more significant than a simple tale of obedience and a boat. Genesis describes Noah as a righteous man, perfect in his generations, a phrase that has troubled Jewish commentators for 2,000 years because the Hebrew word translated perfect. Tamim more often describes physical wholeness or unblemished purity than moral character alone. The Genesis Apocryphon captures exactly this anxiety in the scene where Lamech confronts Noah's birth with open suspicion, wondering aloud whether his son's unusual appearance meant the conception was not his own, whether the Watchers had somehow reached his own household before the flood came. Methuselah travels to consult Enoch directly over this very question, and Enoch's answer, preserved in fragments, reassures Lamech that Noah is indeed his own son, chosen specifically because his bloodline remained untouched by the corruption spreading across the rest of humanity. If this reading holds any weight, then the flood was never merely a punishment for generic wickedness. It was a rescue operation for one uncontaminated family, preserved specifically so that the line leading toward the promise given all the way back in Eden and eventually toward Bethlehem itself could survive a corruption that had very nearly swallowed it whole before the rain ever began to fall. Peter's second epistle takes the account of the Watchers and does something no other New Testament writer attempts quite so explicitly. He places their judgment inside a direct argument about why God's future judgment of the whole earth should be trusted absolutely. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, then the Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. Notice the structure of that argument. Peter does not treat the Watchers as an isolated historical curiosity. He uses their fall as the foundation stone of an argument about the certainty of a coming judgment far larger than the flood, and he places Noah directly beside them in the same sentence, righteousness and rebellion standing side by side as proof that God has always distinguished between the two and always will. Jude, writing independently, reaches almost the identical conclusion using almost identical language, and adds a detail Peter leaves unstated, comparing the Watchers directly to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them in like manner giving themselves over to fornication, and going after strange flesh, are set forth, for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. The phrase strange flesh has troubled translators for generations, because its most natural reading in the Greek describes a transgression of kind, not simply of degree, precisely the same category of violation Enoch describes the Watchers committing when they crossed from their proper heavenly nature into human flesh. Jude places two judgments beside each other: angels who abandoned their domain, and a city that abandoned the created order of human relationship and treats both as the same fundamental crime against the boundaries God had established from the beginning. Boundaries first drawn, remember, at the very gate of Eden itself. What ties all of this together is Christ's own warning in Matthew 24, a passage that becomes almost impossible to read the same way once the full weight of Enoch's testimony has been laid alongside it. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came, and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Most sermons stop at the surface reading here, treating this as a warning against ordinary complacency, people too distracted by everyday life to notice spiritual urgency. But Enoch, Jubilees, and the Genesis Apocryphon all insist the days of Noah were not defined by ordinary distraction alone. They were defined by an active, organized, supernatural corruption of the created order, angelic beings deliberately crossing a forbidden boundary and reshaping the genetic and spiritual landscape of the entire earth. If Christ is drawing a direct parallel between that age and the age preceding his return, the warning carries far more weight than simple distraction. It suggests the final age will involve a resurgence of the very category of transgression the Watchers pioneered, a crossing of boundaries between the heavenly and the earthly that most of the modern church has stopped watching for entirely. There is a reason this vocabulary of gates and boundaries keeps resurfacing across every part of Scripture that touches this subject, from Eden to Enoch to Daniel to Revelation. And it is not stylistic coincidence. It reflects a consistent theological architecture in which creation itself was structured with deliberate divisions: heaven and earth, angel and man, holy ground and common ground, each boundary placed there by design rather than accident. The Watcher's sin was not simply lust or curiosity in the ordinary human sense. It was the deliberate collapse of a structural division built into the fabric of creation from its very first chapter. The same structural division symbolized physically by the gate God placed at Eden the moment Adam and Eve were removed from it. Every subsequent instance of this theme, the giants in Canaan, the prince of Persia resisting Daniel's angel, the dragon cast down in Revelation, describes some variation of the same underlying conflict, an ongoing struggle over whether these ancient boundaries will hold or be violated again. Daniel's own visions reinforce this same layered cosmology of contested authority, operating just beneath the surface of ordinary history. When the angel finally reaches Daniel after 21 days of delay, he explains the reason for the wait plainly. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. This is not poetic language describing political opposition in the abstract. Daniel is being told without ambiguity that a spiritual entity holding authority over an earthly kingdom actively resisted an angelic messenger sent by God, and that resistance was only overcome through the direct intervention of an archangel. This is the same layered structure of contested heavenly authority Enoch describes. Principalities exercising real influence over earthly affairs, some obedient to heaven's order, and some in open defiance of it. Exactly the hierarchy Paul later names in Ephesians when he insists our struggle is not against flesh and blood at all, but against forces far older and far more organized than the modern world has been taught to recognize. Revelation carries this same thread all the way to its final resolution, describing a war in heaven itself, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon fighting and his angels, and the great dragon cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. The vocabulary is unmistakably the same vocabulary Enoch uses centuries earlier to describe the Watchers: a rebellion, a casting out, a confinement, a final judgment, still awaiting complete fulfillment. If the Book of Enoch preserves an authentic memory of the first great rebellion, then Revelation describes its final and total resolution. The same cosmic conflict that began at Eden's locked gate continued through the corruption of the pre-flood world, and will conclude, according to Scripture's own testimony, only when every gate, every prison, and every fallen power described across this entire body of testimony is finally and permanently closed. Eden's gate was never just a boundary against Adam. It was the first line drawn against everything Enoch later witnessed crossing it, and that line is still being tested today. Thank you for walking through this testimony with us. If Enoch's account of the Watchers, the giants, and the world before the flood has opened your eyes to Scripture, you were never taught in church. Our illustrated guide, The Forbidden Book of Enoch, takes you even deeper into every gate, every prison, every vision Enoch was shown, fully illustrated so you can finally see what he saw. The link sits in the first comment below. Subscribe, hit like. Tell us in the comments which part of this account struck you hardest, and stay close, because the next hidden chapter of Scripture is already waiting on your screen.